Well, good morning, everybody. It's going to be a little different today, obviously, so I've got my fancy, that's going to be something, right? What I couldn't figure out is, do you wear glasses up here or do you not? Because if I wear the glasses, I cannot see you. There's a glare, but if I take them off, I cannot see what's going on, but we'll take our chances. So let's start with the first slide here. It has been mentioned that it is my big day, and this is where it all kind of converges for me from the year. It is my big holiday weekend, so thank you all for joining me and being here, or if you're watching online, thank you for celebrating with me. You guys need to stay awake today. I know you had a late night. We're going to do everything we can to keep you awake. But as it was mentioned, it is, obviously, Father's Day. It's a big day, and we celebrate our dads, and you all have my congratulations as well. And as was already mentioned, it is also my birthday. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. 55 years old today. I know what you're thinking. He doesn't look a day over 70, but I'll tell you, I feel it. I thought when I was prepping that I would come down and I would just pick somebody randomly, Mike Pendergraft, to sing happy birthday to me, but Pastor Rob said we have to keep this under 90 minutes, so we won't do that. Next one, it is also my anniversary. And so lesson to you guys, get married on your birthday so you don't forget. I've only done that once in 29 years. That was an expensive anniversary. But you could look at the camera up there and you could wave to Lori. She's in Charlotte with her mom this weekend, but you could say, happy anniversary, Lori. She's obviously a saint. And you're thinking, what went so wrong in her life that she's so lucky. But these 3 days are what we're talking about, but it was also another holiday this weekend. Anybody know what yesterday was? Juneteenth, and how exciting it was to see that is now a federal holiday. I've been studying this because it's an interesting holiday for me, and I'm going to talk more about this, which really isn't part of the message, but it kind of sets where we want to go today. So I want to talk a little bit about Juneteenth. I have some facts for you, and what I've learned is it was actually a state holiday in 47 states and the District of Columbia. Why not Hawaii? Why not North Dakota or South Dakota? I don't know, but I was glad to see that it had become a federal holiday as of this week. But here are a few things I want to tell you about Juneteenth, and I really have to lay out a timeline for you. Just so bear with me on this. It sounds like a history lesson, and I was a social studies teacher in a previous life, so bear with me on this. But the first thing you need to know for the timeline is this. Our Civil War, which was also called the War Between the States, or some people from the South would say the War of Northern Aggression, it took place from 1861 to 1865. It's a 4-year war. Know this. Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated about a month before this started, and he was assassinated within about a week of the end of the war. So that was his presidency. Know that. That's important for Juneteenth, right? This war, if you were to line up all of the casualties from the Civil War, all of the American casualties on one column, and then all of the casualties from every other war we've been involved in, Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Vietnam, Korea, World War I, II, all of them. If you lined them up, it would be almost the same number of American casualties. That's what this war was. That's what was going on here. And strangely enough, about 2/3 of those American casualties in the Civil War were not on the battlefield. It was illness and sickness and things that were going on in camp and that kind of thing. Anyhow, not important. But for where we're going next, put the next one up, please. There was an Emancipation Proclamation. Now, you've heard that term before, but something in here very interesting that I don't think a lot of folks know. You see, what happened was Abraham Lincoln became president in 1861. In the summer of 1862, about a year after the war had started, he was toying around with an idea of how can I put out some kind of proclamation that would free the enslaved people in the Confederate States. And so he put something out in September of 1862. We're going through the timeline here. Now, interestingly, it was going to take effect on New Year's Day, 1863. So about 3 months from the time he actually put it out there as a public statement until it happened. Now, this is a very strategic point. I want you to look at some of the language that's in the Emancipation Proclamation. We've all heard of it before, but I doubt we've ever read it. And so I just have a small portion of it here. The part that's in red is very interesting to me. So it says basically, all persons held as slaves in any state where the people are in rebellion, those enslaved people will be set free. What's interesting about that is this was a strategic shot at the Confederate States, right? So they withdrew, they became their own nation, the Confederate States of America. And of course, the United States said, no, you can't do that, and so we have this war, and it's grounded in slavery. Well, what's happening is he's saying, if you've got 3 months from now until January 1st to either come back to the Union, or we are going to free your enslaved people. Now, you can imagine how that went over. What's interesting, there were border states. There were states that allowed slavery, but they never signed on with the Confederacy. Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, and eventually West Virginia. Those states had slavery, but they were not part of the Confederate States of America. They were not included in this. So what he's saying is, if you're one of the states that has withdrawn, if you're Mississippi, North Carolina, Georgia, all those states, we're going to free your enslaved people. But the people in Maryland and Delaware and those places, you can continue with slavery. People don't realize that about the Emancipation Proclamation. So, next slide. The war ends in 1865. Next slide, there it is. And what happens is, of course, you can imagine the people who received this proclamation, who were in the southern states, who were people who had enslaved people on their property, they were thinking, well, first of all, Abe Lincoln, you're not my president anyhow because we're our own country, so they're not listening. So slavery is still happening. The war ends in April of 1863. In 2 months later, slavery is still happening. Why are enslaved people not free yet? Well, we had to go down with the federal troops and make sure that happened, and the last place that took place was June 19th, 1865, 2 months after General Lee surrendered. And so they went down to Galveston, Texas, they read a proclamation, and anyhow, that's how it happened. You can put the next one up. And then the next one. What's interesting is we celebrate June 19th, and we should, because it's something we absolutely should celebrate, and I'm so glad that we are. But in reality, December, 6 months later, December, the 13th Amendment was adopted, and that's when we abolished slavery in all states. And so that's really when it happened. So anyhow, but June 19th, absolutely, we should celebrate it, and I'm so glad that we did. So it's part of, I'm wrapping it into my big weekend here, so it's a big day for me. But this is not what we want to talk about. Oh, and by the way, it didn't become a holiday in any state until 1980, 115 years later. Isn't that interesting? Ironically, can you guess what state was the first one? Texas. Yeah. So that is not what we want to talk about today, but that kind of sets the tone. Where I want to go today is I want to tell you about something or get you thinking about something along with me, something that I think about quite a bit, something that I'm very, very interested in. It's just a historical topic that has fascinated me since childhood, and it hasn't gone away, and I enjoy studying about this and learning more. And so I want to invite you today to study with me a little bit about the Underground Railroad. So we'll get that one up there. And I have just a few facts I want to share about the Underground Railroad, and then I have some photos. I know you're excited. I even have satellite imagery. It's coming. Hang in there. Don't go to sleep. All right, so the Underground Railroad, a couple facts about it. First of all, it is a network of secret routes. It's trails, it's pathways, it's a secret network that includes safe places, houses, churches, places where people can hide, because this is a railroad that we used. Well, it's called an underground railroad. You're thinking if it's like a subway in New York City. That's not it. It's not actually choo-choo trains, and it's not underground, but it's called underground because it's secretive, and we don't want people to know about it because there's a lot at stake. There's a lot to risk. But it is a way of taking enslaved African Americans from southern states and moving them secretly to northern states we call free states, and preferably Canada. And I say preferably Canada because being in a free state was better than being in a slave state, but it wasn't entirely free. There were still risks. There were bounty hunters rounding up free African American people and bringing them back down south and selling them as escaped slaves. Those kinds of things still happened. It was not as bad as where it was, but Canada was better, and partially because Canada totally abolished slavery in 1834. So, having said that, we think that about 100,000 people used this Underground Railroad to escape to either northern states or to Canada. Now, that number could be a little higher, could be a little lower, but that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people in a very secretive way, trusting a lot of people to get to a place of safety. So I want you to, and I know this is going to be really impossible, but I'm going to ask you to do this, to think to yourself, to put yourself in the mind of an enslaved person from the early 1800s. We can pick a year. Let's say 1840. It's 1840, and you are an enslaved person. Now, none of us can understand what that's like, and we never will be able to understand that. But I want you to try. I want you to think about this. If you are an enslaved person, what has your life been like? Well, you were probably born enslaved. You haven't traveled much. You probably have lived in the same small place and really haven't ventured far from there. You probably have not had the luxury of any kind of education. I don't even know if you have shoes. You've lived a very difficult life. You live in fear. You're always looking over your shoulder. You have to watch everything. You have to look out for those around you and watch everything. You train your children very carefully to be careful with what they say and do. You live in fear. There is no freedom. This is your life. You hear about this Underground Railroad. This sounds like a fantasy. You hear about this crazy Disneyland they call Canada where there's freedom for people. You hear about things up north where maybe you can actually get a job. Maybe you can have an income. Maybe if you get up there, you can actually have property. You hear about these things. You hear about this, but you're not so sure. It's rumors, right? You've heard about it, but you're not really sure. Now, you have a possible invitation to go and escape and be part of this Underground Railroad. Do you do it? That's the big question. That's what I want you to wrestle with. Do you do it? I'm going to give you a few reasons why maybe you don't want to do it. You could probably come up with 30. If we had time today, we could get in groups and get out the chart paper, and we'd come up with 30 reasons. But I'm going to give you a few. And so let's start with these. Reasons not to leave. And these are in no particular order. I didn't try to prioritize them, but I just want to share them with you. Reason number one. You don't want to. Oh, that's 1 and 2. You don't want to leave because if your escape is successful, guess what? You're never going to see the people you love again. So think about that. I mean, you have families right now and people that you love. Would you leave them behind for a possible better life, knowing you're never going to see them again? That's a huge thing to consider. Number two, if you're unsuccessful, it's going to be bad. I mean, life has been bad up until now. It's going to be really bad, like we've never experienced before. That is another reason that maybe you don't want to try to escape. These are strong reasons. I mean, right here, these are enough, but there's more. Next one. There are so many unknowns. You don't know where you're going. You've never even seen a map before. You don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know who's going to take you there. You don't know how you're going to eat. You don't know anything, and you don't even know what you're going to do when you get there. So many unknowns. Again, reasons why maybe we don't do this. Next one. The physical toll of the journey. I hear it's going to take weeks, maybe months. Running through the woods at nighttime, I don't know how this is going to be. I'm going into, and then the next one goes with this. I don't know if it's going to be cold. I'm heading north. I hear it snows up there. I may not have shoes. I don't know how I'm going to eat. What if I get sick? I mean, personally, me thinking about running through the woods, snakes, I mean, just all of that. I mean, all of the things that go into just more reasons on top of all the other reasons. Another one. There are bounty hunters. These are not good people. These are people with the singular laser-like focus of just finding you, capturing you, bringing you back for sale. That is their job, and unfortunately, they're very good at it, and they're looking for you. They're out in the woods along the way. When you get up north, they're looking for you up there. They're all over the place. This is their living. You are their meal ticket. That is another reason. And then the last one I have, how about this? How many white people have you met in your life? And how have they treated you? And now you're going to trust that somehow there's these white people, unlike the white people you know, that out of the goodness of their heart, they're going to help you get to freedom. Any one of these are a good enough reason for me maybe not to go. Those are reasons not to go. But the next slide tells us, well, why would we go? And there's only one reason. There's only one thing that we would go for. And it is right here. This is what we would go for. This is a human fundamental need. Going back to the history of time, you can, even going into biblical stories, you can look at people who need freedom and are willing to give up anything for freedom. They'll give up their lives, they'll give up everything for freedom. We have people who gave up their lives for our freedom. we celebrate that, right? 2 weeks from today, we celebrate a nation of freedom. We celebrate independence. We have fireworks and we have cookouts. We have all these things. Well, that's wonderful. But there's something about freedom that we are willing to, as a people, we will give up everything for that. Even those other treacherous things that we just mentioned, we'll give those up for freedom, or we'll risk those for freedom. So let's take a look at a map. Maps are fun. Here's a map of the eastern part of the United States, and you can see, like, if you are trying to jump onto this Underground Railroad and you're trying to get to freedom, real freedom, you have a couple options here. There's these Great Lakes are a problem. I don't know if you've ever seen the Great Lakes in person, but they're not like Jordan Lake, okay? They're enormous. Like, I mean, the smallest one is Lake Ontario, and it's bigger than some of our states. It's about the size of New Jersey. You can see that there are some natural ports of entry. If you go up through Kentucky and Ohio and Michigan, there's a port of entry into Canada that way, kind of through Detroit, that area. Or you can go up through Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. In between there, the Buffalo, Niagara region, you can get into Canada that way. Those are two very popular routes for people to get into the freedom of Canada. Next slide. I want to blow up that Niagara region. That's home for me, so that's what I'm familiar with. So that's kind of where I want to take our conversation now. This is a satellite image of that Niagara, we call the Niagara Peninsula. On the south there, I know, I brought it just for this purpose, right? Right here, you see, that is the northern tip of Lake Erie. And then up at the top there, that is Lake Ontario. And so the Niagara River connects them, and it is roughly 36, 37 miles, something like that. And everything that you see on this map on the right-hand side, to the east, that's New York State, and to the left, the west, that's Ontario. So if you've made it through all of these stops, many stops, right? It's been weeks, it's been months, however long it's been from the time you took that daring escape and you left, and I don't know how treacherous your journey is, but now you're here, all you got to do is get across that river, and you're in freedom, right? And so there's obviously places where the river's a little thinner. Well, that's great, except right here, that is where the Niagara Falls is. That can be a little bit of a problem. And so if you can, I don't know if you can see this, there's like a black line that kind of goes right along here. That's an escarpment. My understanding is that escarpment goes really, really far, like as far as Wisconsin. But it's a place where the land, you have high land and low land, right? And so there's basically a cliff. And so many, many years ago, this river, when it went over that cliff at that point, that's where Niagara Falls would have started. But over the years, it has backed up about 7 miles to this point. And it has formed this gorge along the way. The next one shows a better picture of that. And you can see these deep cliffs. Those go for 7 miles. So if you're trying to get to Canada, you're not going there, obviously. Just climbing down would be a problem. Getting across the rapids would be a problem. Climbing back up. So you don't want to do that. This is a great picture, by the way, isn't it? Just as a point of reference, if you've never been, the Horseshoe Falls over on the right, we call that the Horseshoe Falls, and the traditional Niagara Falls on the left. If you want to be a daredevil and get in a barrel, I would suggest you go to the one on the right. You probably won't survive either one, but you're definitely not going to survive the one on the left with all those rocks. But you can see this gorge, and it goes down. The next photo is the Niagara River as it kind of gets a little softer. And you can see how it goes out into Lake Ontario there. So again, on the right, New York State. On the left is Canada. It probably is about 1,500 feet across at this point, because I know what you're thinking. You get to the edge, and you're looking at it. Can I make it? How do I get there? It's the last step, right? It's a big step. So there is a historic little village of Lewiston, New York, and it borders on Niagara Falls. And Lewiston has this rich history of getting folks, of being kind of the last stop on the Underground Railroad and getting folks from here into Canada. And there's lots of great stories and things we don't have time for today. There was the station master, as he was referred to, was a gentleman named Josiah Tryon. And a legend has it he was a pastor in Lewiston, and he was also a tailor. He owned a tailor shop. And so what he would do, and the folks in Lewiston were fiercely loyal. They were not going to rat out anybody who was trying to escape. They were very good to try to help the enslaved folks get over to Canada. And so Josiah Tryon would make these brightly colored, he would befriend the bounty hunters, and he'd make these brightly colored cloaks or jackets for them. And so all the folks in town knew that if you saw somebody wearing one of these bright jackets, that's a bounty hunter. Don't tell them what's happening. Don't tell them times or dates or places or any of that kind of stuff. And so, anyhow, that's what's happening. Just another fun fact. This has nothing to do with anything, but this next slide. If you look across Lake Ontario on a clear day, you can see this, which is kind of cool. It's the silhouette of the city of Toronto. Next slide. So last time I was up there, last summer, I went for a walk early one morning, and I went to the water, to the bank, and I stood there and I looked out, and I was really fascinated because I'd really been reading up on this and just thinking more about the Underground Railroad, and I'm sitting here and I'm looking, and I'm trying to put myself into the mind of an escaped, enslaved person, and I've done all the things. I've risked everything, and I've made it this far, and I'm right here, and I'm looking at freedom, and that's Canada right there. And my first thought is, can I swim that? I'm not a good swimmer. I can swim a little bit, but I don't know if I can swim that. There's also a very strong current taking you out, and probably 8 months out of the year it's very, very cold, and there's chunks of ice that flow down here in the wintertime, so there's that. So you really need probably a boat, but you got to know that bounty hunters have boats too. There's all kinds of risks still to this point, but this is freedom right there that they're looking at. Next. So I go back to our thought about, so why do all of this? And it comes back to freedom, right? But it's not just freedom in a sense of fireworks and cookouts. It's freedom next to fail. That's what we want the freedom to do. We want the freedom to live without fear. We want the freedom to live able to fail. This is something that we crave. This is something that we need. It's a human need. I want to go back to the next slide, which actually takes us back to that overhead photo. If you'll look at right here, there's a man-made reservoir, part of the power project. About right here, about within a mile or so of that reservoir, there was a house, 5640 Grower Road, house where I grew up. I could look out the back window and I could see the bank of the reservoir. Well, in that house, there was me, there was a mom, there was a little brother, but there was a dad. I had a dad in that house, and it was interesting because if you grew up with a dad, and I was very fortunate to do so. I mean, I have so many friends and so many people I know who did not have that luxury, and I guess I took it for granted at the time, but now I appreciate the fact that I had a dad in my house. But if you had a dad in your house, then maybe you're familiar with this cycle that we go through sometimes with dads, especially I think sons and their fathers. You're 5 years old, you're 7 years old, you're 9 years old. Dad can do anything. He can fix anything. He can solve problems. I mean, he's Superman. And then you get to be about 13 and you're pretty smart and you're getting smarter, and all of a sudden you realize Dad is fallible, Dad makes mistakes, and in many cases I think I'm smarter than Dad. I know what's right. I know what's going on. Then you get to be about 29, and you've got your own household, and you're trying to juggle a job and kids and spouse and all that, and you're trying to soak up all the wisdom from Dad you can get. Like, Dad, how did you do it? How did you make it? I think it was Mark Twain who's credited with the famous saying, I was surprised. My dad was the stupidest man I knew when I was 17, and I was surprised by how much he learned by the time I turned 21. Kind of that whole thing. So we go through that cycle. But, my dad, he could fix anything. He could do anything. He was, that was what I thought when I was little. And what was interesting, because I thought that, even though it's not actually accurate, I thought it provided me with a safety net. A safety net. I had no reason to fear anything as a child. I could do anything. I could fail. It didn't matter. I could take chances. If I broke a window, Dad knew how to fix it. If I got in trouble at school, he would tell me what to do. I mean, I never worried about us missing a meal. I never worried about any of that stuff. Like I was going to come home from school one day and find an eviction notice on the house. I mean, it all could have happened, but I didn't think it would happen. I just lived in freedom. I had that freedom as a child. I did not worry about that stuff. We were not rich, but Dad had it covered. He took care of us. And so as I got old enough to realize that was not the case, that Dad was fallible, that he wasn't Superman, that was right, fortunately for me, that was right about the time somebody was introducing me to Jesus. And all of a sudden, I'm learning about this God who cares for me, and there's a real safety net there. And I'm learning, as this one is crumbling, and I'm learning that it's not real, I have this other safety net that's coming into place. Like all of a sudden, now this is like the real deal. This, I can be sure of. This, I can fail. I have this new sense of freedom And look out, world, because when you get somebody with a sense of freedom where they don't have to worry about failure or fearing anything, that's how you change the world. We're going to come and talk more about that in just a minute. But there is, I want to talk about someone in this room who has no fear of failure. A couple weeks ago, after church, Lori and I went to lunch with this guy. You know him. He sings real loud. He's back there. Aaron. Love Aaron Del Bando. He's like the son I never wanted. Aaron, we went out to lunch, and it was funny. We were having this conversation, and I don't know if you remember this, Aaron, or not, but he said something. It stunned me. It just stopped me in my tracks. And the paraphrase is, Aaron said, I love when I fail. I learn so much when I fail. And I'm thinking, this is like a 20-something-year-old guy. Who has poured into him this kind of investment into his life, that he's got this safety net, that he can live his life that way? And as I've gotten to know Aaron, he lives his life that way. He does not fear anything. How can I be like that? Because this guy is out there, he's ministering to people. He walks up to homeless people down in Raleigh. No fear, nothing. I want to live like that. That was a stunning statement to me. Well, the Bible gives us reason to do that. There's verses that are just one after another. I mean, I can think of one of the lowest times in my life where this was what got me through. I mean, when the Bible tells us, when Jesus tells us that surely I am with you always to the end of the age, well, we shouldn't need any more. That's it right there. If you believe that, if you truly soak that in, well, then you should be able to live a life of true freedom. No fear. No worrying about failure. Next one. Another verse comes from Isaiah. He says, do not fear. I am with you. I am your God. Well, if you truly believe that, then what could you possibly fear? Next one. David writes, whom shall I fear? The Lord is my stronghold. Of whom shall I be afraid? Of what shall I be afraid? Nothing. So the Bible, and there's no shortage of these. I've just given you 3, but you could go through and you could find a gazillion reasons in the Bible why you should have true freedom. The freedom that we pursue, the freedom that we're willing to give up our lives for, it's right there for us. Next. So, this is your homework, okay? We're going to, I'd say that we're going to wrap up, but I want to talk about this for a minute. But this is the assignment for us. Dads, this is what you do with your children. But it's not just for dads. It's for all of us. You with your colleagues, or you with your neighbors, or people that you work with, or whatever it might be, family members. We have this obligation. We've got to make sure people understand why they have value, why they matter to God. If you can convince them that they have value, that they matter to God, they will have a safety net. They will have that freedom to fail, to take chances, to take risks. That's what we want. We think, okay, well, these guys over here, they're making all these life decisions about what's next and, how close to the vest should I play it, or should I just go out there and take risks? It's not just these guys. Every one of us is at a crossroads all the time in our lives. We come across these things all the time. And so what do I do? Do I step out? Do I take those chances? Well, if I know that I matter to God, that He cares about me, then I'm going to have that safety net. If that's where my faith is, it's going to be life-changing. So I know you know these things, but I'm going to give them to you anyhow so you can share them as part of your homework. I want you to share these. This week, I want you to be encouragers, to go out and to encourage, which I've heard a wonderful definition of encourage. It's to put courage in. I want you to find somebody and put courage into them based on what I'm going to show you here. I've got just 7 quick things to show you. And I'm not going to, I know 7, oh my goodness. No, it's just real quick. These are the things that you can share with people and let them know why they matter to God. And they're all biblical. I'm not making any of these up. First one. We are children of the King. If you can save up your money and go on one trip in your life, go to the Grand Canyon. Go stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon. It's something to see it on TV, and it's nice to look at it in postcards or online, but you got to stand there and breathe it in. When you see the Grand Canyon, it's amazing. Go out to the Colorado Rockies and look up at the top of the mountain as high as you can see when it goes into the clouds. And then look above the clouds and see the peak of the mountain. See that majesty. Go stand at the side of the Niagara Falls and hear that roaring water. There's a God who made all of those, right? There's this king, this creator. Look into the sky. There's billions of stars that we can count, and we don't know how many we can't count. The God who made all of that, the king, you are his child. Pastor Rob said a couple weeks ago in a message, he said, no high-ranking official of the king would disturb the king's nap to go ask for a sandwich. But the child of the king could do that. You have that access. You can do that. Tell people that. Share that message. Let them know that you are a child of that king, that creator who has no beginning and no end. You are his child. If we just stop right here and that's it, that's the thing that builds the safety net for everybody so that we can live in true freedom. But there's more. There's so many more. Next one. In the very next verse in Romans, it talks about we are heirs. So all of these things that God created, we are heirs of all of it. This is ours. We are his children. We are co-heirs with Christ. That's what it says. And so if we know that, all of this is for me, wow, I got freedom. There's no reason I should be afraid of anybody or anything or any situation or any circumstance. Are you kidding? I'm a child of the king. Now, it's easy to say that. It's hard to live that way. That comes back to faith. Next one. God made us, you, me, and all the people you're going to talk to this week in his image. Not an accident. Now, somebody could say, oh, well, my parents didn't want me. I was an oops baby, whatever. Well, guess what? God had a purpose for you. God created you specifically the way you are for a specific reason. And that reason is he wants to commune with you. And so you are certainly made in his image. That right there should be the value that you need. But there's more. Next one. Not only does God tolerate us, not only does God allow us to be around him, God pursues us. How amazing is that? Have you thought about that? The maker of all those things pursues you. He wants to have that relationship with you. If you don't know you're valuable yet, you should know it now because God wants that relationship with you. Next, God calls us his friend. I don't know about you, but friendship, that's a strong word, right? I mean, when you're friends, you don't rat out your friends. When you're friends for life. You stick up for your friends. Imagine if God is your friend. Imagine that. Well, he is. That's what he calls us. His terms, not ours. He calls us friend. That's an amazing, amazing thing. Next, Jesus doesn't want to put a vacation home in your heart. He doesn't want to have a timeshare. He wants to live in your heart. He has chosen you to be his home. If that's not a reason to have value, I don't know what is. Next, and the last one. God sent his son to die for us so that we can live forever. And here's the thing, and I've actually, I think, said this before. If you were the only person ever on the face of this earth, you were the only one, and you were sinful and you could not be in his perfect eternity, he would still send his son to suffer, to go through all of that just for you. It wasn't just for the masses, it was for us individually. If that's not a reason to know that you're valued, I don't know what is. All of these, there's so many reasons that we have value. But here's the common thread. Look at all of these things. There's not one thing in here that is related to what you do. None of it. None of it. You do not have value to God because of the size of your bank account. You do not have value to God because of the big title you have at work. You do not have value to God because you drive a Tesla. Sorry, Peter. You knew there was going to be a Tesla comment. None of those. You have value to God because of who he is and what he has done, not because of anything that we have done. And therefore, you can't earn your value with God. You can't get enough points in the bank, or there's no magical checklist where you can just kind of, if I check all these off, I'll have value to God. You were born, you had value to God before you ever uttered your first word. If we can convince people that they have value to God, they will have that safety net that we've talked about. They will have that freedom that people have risked their lives for, real freedom, a freedom to live without fear. And I'm going to wrap up with this last verse here. This one. Right here. You've seen this before, right? If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain, move, and it will move. You're not going to have that kind of faith unless you know that you're valued by God and that you have that freedom that comes with it. And so what I want you guys to do is I want you to know that you're valued. I want you to share that message. You hear me saying it over and over. I mean, when we're done here in just a minute, you're going to walk out these doors. I want you to kick these doors open. I want you to go out into the world and live a life of true freedom, a life that has no fear, no worry, no stress, no anxiety, no fear, because you are children of God. You are heirs. He calls you friend. He sent his son to die for you. He wants to make us all the reasons we just described. You have value. Go out and live your life in a way that just changes the world, that will have impact. That will have impact. A life of fear, a life of staying in the house and never going outside and taking risks, you're not going to change anybody's life. But go out there and live with freedom, the freedom to fail, the freedom that we saw everybody pursue, that freedom, and you will change lives. Thank you so much.